She grew up in a small home where days passed quietly and dreams were often pushed aside. Life was simple, but it was not easy. Money was always counted carefully, and time was mostly spent thinking about responsibilities rather than passions. People around her believed that success belonged to those who were loud, confident, or lucky. She was none of those things. She was quiet, observant, and often overlooked. From the outside, she seemed ordinary, the kind of person people forget easily. Music had always been present in her life, but only from a distance. It came from radios playing in the background, from wedding videos, from old songs heard during long evenings. No one in her family was a musician. Music was something to listen to, not something to chase. Still, whenever she heard piano sounds, something inside her shifted. The slow rise and fall of the notes felt like a language she somehow understood without learning. The first time she saw a piano up close, it was in a place she had no reason to be. She was waiting for someone, standing quietly in a corner, when her eyes rested on the instrument. It wasn't new or shiny. The surface had small scratches, and some keys showed signs of age. But to her it looked powerful, almost alive. She stood there longer than she needed to, staring as if the piano was staring back. People nearby noticed her interest and smiled lightly. One person laughed and said piano was easy, just pressing keys in the right order. Another said anyone could learn it if they had time. Their words were not cruel, just careless. They spoke with confidence, as if struggle did not exist in the world of music. She didn't respond. She simply nodded and stepped away. But the sound of the piano followed her long after she left. That night, she could not sleep. Her mind replayed the sound of those keys again and again. It wasn't about becoming famous or being praised. It was about understanding that sound, about knowing how something so simple-looking could hold so much emotion. She wondered what it felt like to sit in front of it, to place her fingers on the keys, to create something real. When she mentioned wanting to learn piano, the reaction was predictable. People around her didn't take it seriously. Some smiled politely. Some changed the topic. A few said it would be a waste of time. They believed learning piano was a hobby for people with extra money and free schedules, not for someone like her. They reminded her of practical things, of duties she could not escape. She listened quietly. She always did. But inside, something refused to let go. It wasn't stubbornness. It was more like a gentle pull, steady and patient. She didn't argue or defend herself. She simply kept the thought to herself, allowing it to grow silently. Finding access to a piano was not easy. There was no instrument at home. Lessons were expensive, and guidance was limited. Still, she found small ways to get closer. She watched videos when she could, listened carefully to how notes changed mood, and imagined her fingers moving across keys she had never touched. It wasn't real practice, but it was a beginning. Eventually, she found a place where she could sit in front of a piano for short periods of time. The first moment she touched the keys, she realized how wrong everyone had been. It was not easy. Her fingers felt stiff and unsure. The sound that came out was uneven and messy. The piano did not respond kindly to hesitation. It demanded attention, patience, and respect. She felt embarrassed at first. Anyone watching could tell she didn't know what she was doing. Her hands trembled slightly, and her posture was awkward. A few people nearby glanced at her and looked away quickly, as if they already knew how the story would end. She almost stood up and left. Almost instead, she stayed. She pressed another key, then another. The sound wasn't beautiful, but it was honest. It reflected exactly where she was confused, nervous, but curious. She practiced for only a short time that day, but when she walked away, she felt different. Tired, yes. Frustrated, definitely. But also alive. Days passed, and she returned whenever she could. Her schedule was tight, and life didn't slow down for her dreams. Some days she barely had the energy to sit. Other days she questioned why she was even trying. Still, she showed up. Even when progress felt invisible, she showed up. People continued to comment. Some said she was brave. Others said she was unrealistic. A few joked that piano looks easier than it sounds, laughing as if struggle was amusing. She heard them, but she didn't let their voices become louder than her own thoughts. She knew now that the piano was not simple. It was honest. It revealed effort immediately. There was no way to pretend. At home, she practiced movements in the air, imagining keys beneath her fingers. She tapped rhythms quietly on tables and knees. Music slowly became part of how she breathed, how she thought. It wasn't perfect or structured, but it was real. There were moments when she failed badly. Wrong notes echoed louder than the right ones. Her hands refused to cooperate. Tears came once or twice, quickly wiped away. No one needed to see that part. She learned that frustration was not a sign to stop, but a sign that she was pushing past comfort. One evening, after a particularly difficult session, she sat alone and thought about quitting. The idea felt heavy but tempting. Life would be simpler without this added challenge. She could return to being unnoticed, safe from judgment. For a moment, she believed that might be better, but then she remembered the first sound that had caught her attention. The way it made her feel understood without words. She realized that even if she never became great, walking away would hurt more than struggling ever could. That understanding settled quietly in her chest, so she continued slowly, imperfectly, without promises of success. She stopped trying to impress anyone and focused only on learning. Each small improvement felt personal, not something to display. The piano became a mirror, showing her not just mistakes, but growth. By the end of this beginning stage, nothing dramatic had changed. She wasn't skilled. She wasn't confident. People still doubted her. But something important had shifted. She no longer believed the piano was easy, and neither did she expect herself to be. This was only the start. The real challenge was just beginning, and she knew it. Still, she welcomed it. Because for the first time in a long while, she wasn't just surviving life. She was choosing something for herself. One uncertain note at a time. She thought that once she understood the piano a little, things would become easier. She believed that effort alone would bring quick results. She quickly realized that learning was not a straight path. Each day brought new challenges that seemed to test her patience more than her skill. At first, she tried to play simple songs she had seen in videos. She imagined her fingers moving smoothly, producing music that would feel natural. But reality was far from her imagination. Her fingers stumbled over the keys, often landing on wrong notes. Simple rhythms were complicated by uneven timing, and her hands sometimes refused to move the way her mind intended. Mistakes seemed endless, and she wondered if she was really cut out for this. She had always believed that passion was enough. But now, she faced the truth that passion alone did not make things easy. The piano demanded focus, repetition, and patience. Every small melody required her to think ahead, to anticipate the movement of each hand. It was exhausting, both physically and mentally. Her arms ached, her back hurt from sitting too long. And yet she persisted. Those around her continued to underestimate the effort required. Friends and family occasionally asked how her practice was going, expecting a quick answer or some exciting progress. When they saw her struggle, they would shake their heads gently, say, "It's harder than you thought, isn't it?" Sometimes their tone was teasing, sometimes pitying. It stung, even though she tried not to let it. The first few months were the hardest. She often spent hours trying to get a single sequence of notes right. Sometimes, after repeated failures, she would stop, feeling discouraged. She thought about quitting many times. It seemed easier to return to her previous life, where effort and expectation were predictable and manageable. But music had become more than a hobby. It was slowly becoming a part of who she was. She could not ignore the pull of the piano, the way it made her feel alive. The quiet joy that even her mistakes could not erase. Even when she hit wrong keys, sound told a story she wanted to continue exploring. She tried to find a teacher, someone who could guide her, someone who could explain things that videos could not. Lessons were expensive, but she managed to save small amounts to pay for a few sessions. Her teacher noticed her determination, but he did not offer false praise. Instead, he told her that progress came slowly and only through consistent practice. He emphasized discipline over talent, patience over speed. Every session left her exhausted but motivated. She realized that the piano would not forgive shortcuts. The instrument required her full attention, and it reflected her effort immediately. Every error was noticeable, every success earned. That honesty was harsh at times, but it was also refreshing. She began to see the piano not just as an object, but as a partner in her journey. She spent hours alone practicing the same sequences repeatedly. The sound often frustrated her. Sometimes it was so far from what she imagined that she wanted to give up entirely. She had to remind herself constantly that every pianist had started exactly where she was. No one begins with mastery. Everyone begins with mistakes. This thought kept her moving forward. Her routine started to change. She woke up earlier, carved out quiet moments for practice, and rearranged her day to fit the piano into her life. At first, it was difficult to balance everything. Responsibilities at home demanded attention, and fatigue often pulled her away. Yet she found that the more she prioritized practice, the more focused and clear her mind became. Piano was no longer just a task. It was a source of strength. She faced discouragement in other forms as well. Some people openly mocked her mistakes, claiming she was wasting time on something she would never master. Others offered unsolicited advice, insisting that she should focus on practical skills that could earn money. She learned to listen politely and then continue quietly on her own path. The piano was not for them. It was for her. Slowly, she noticed small improvements. Her fingers moved more confidently, her timing became steadier, and sequences that once seemed impossible began to flow. Each tiny victory felt enormous because it was hard-won. She celebrated in silence, proud of her progress. Yet aware of how much more there was to learn, the piano also taught her patience in ways she had not expected. Life outside practice still had its challenges, but her struggles with the instrument became a metaphor. She learned to endure frustration without giving up, to approach difficulties methodically, and to appreciate small successes rather than expect instant perfection. During this time, she began to experiment with expressing emotions through her playing. Notes that were once mechanical now carried feeling. Slow melodies reflected her sadness or uncertainty, while fast, playful sequences showed her excitement or relief. The piano became a mirror of her inner world, a way to communicate when words failed. One afternoon, after a particularly long session, she paused to reflect. She realized how far she had come. What had once been chaotic and frustrating now had structure, even beauty. It was not perfect, but it was hers. She felt a quiet pride, knowing that every note was a result of her effort, every sound a testimony of her persistence. Despite these successes, she continued to encounter obstacles. Certain passages remained stubbornly difficult, and some mistakes persisted no matter how much she practiced. These moments tested her resolve. She often questioned why she continued, why she endured the slow pace, why she allowed herself to struggle when the easy path was available. The answer was simple yet profound. She had fallen in love with the process, not just the outcome. The piano challenged her, demanded her attention, and reflected her effort honestly. It did not allow shortcuts or deception. She realized that the lessons she was learning were more valuable than any applause or recognition. Friends and family began to notice changes as well. Her posture improved, her confidence grew, and a quiet determination became visible in her demeanor. They still doubted her abilities, but they could not deny the commitment she displayed. Some began to ask questions, curious about what motivated her to continue despite the difficulties. She responded simply, explaining that music had become a part of her life, that it was not about proving anyone wrong, but about proving to herself that she could learn and grow. Her explanation was met with nods of understanding from some and quiet skepticism from others. It did not matter. She had moved beyond seeking approval. As the months passed, her relationship with the piano deepened. She began to understand subtle nuances, how pressure on a key could change a tone, how timing could affect emotion, how silence between notes was just as important as the sound itself. These insights came slowly and required careful attention, but they brought immense satisfaction. She also began to explore her creativity. Once she had mastered basic sequences, She experimented with small improvisations, adding her own style and interpretation. Mistakes still happened, but they no longer discouraged her. Instead, they became part of the learning process, guiding her toward improvement. The piano, which had once seemed intimidating and unapproachable, was now a partner in her life. It challenged her, frustrated her, and sometimes exhausted her. But it also rewarded her with growth, understanding, and a sense of achievement she had never experienced before. By the end of this stage, she was no longer the person who had thought piano would be easy. She had learned the truth through repeated effort, frustration, and small victories. She understood now that mastery required patience, dedication, and a willingness to struggle. It was not the piano that was difficult. It was the commitment to growth, the willingness to face failure, and the courage to continue despite doubt. Her journey was only beginning, but she had already transformed. She was stronger, more disciplined, and more self-aware. She had discovered that perseverance could bring joy and that struggle could lead to understanding. And although the piano had not yet revealed all its secrets, she knew she was ready to continue, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and determined to let her music speak for her. No matter how long it took, she had grown accustomed to the routine of practice. But life outside the piano continued to challenge her. Responsibilities never paused. Bills had to be paid, meals prepared, chores completed, and family matters addressed. Some days, exhaustion from these obligations made it almost impossible to pick up the piano. She often had to push herself, convincing her mind and body that even a short practice session was worth it. The struggle became not only about mastering music, but also about balancing life. She sometimes felt guilty for spending time on herself instead of purely on her duties. She questioned whether it was selfish to pursue a passion that demanded energy and attention when so many other demands existed. But the piano had become her sanctuary, a place where she could recharge and understand herself better. She realized that neglecting it would leave her feeling incomplete. She also faced criticism from some who believed she was wasting time. Their comments were not harsh, but they implied that music could never be a serious endeavor. Some friends suggested focusing on skills that could guarantee financial stability. They did not understand the need for personal fulfillment, for growth, for a purpose beyond survival. Each remark was a reminder of how far she had to go, yet it also strengthened her resolve to continue. There were moments when self-doubt crept in deeply. She compared herself to others she thought were more talented or naturally gifted. Watching videos of skilled pianists made her question whether she had any real ability. Her hands sometimes felt clumsy, incapable of producing even simple melodies correctly. The temptation to quit was strong during these moments. It would have been easier to accept limitations and step away quietly, but giving up was never truly satisfying to her. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a companion that reflected her determination and patience. Every wrong note reminded her of the work still to be done, and every small success reminded her of her persistence. The combination of failure and progress created a rhythm of learning that she could not abandon. Her practice became more structured. She started focusing on problem areas, breaking difficult pieces into smaller sections. Instead of attempting an entire song at once, she worked slowly, mastering tiny sequences before moving forward. This method was tedious and often frustrating, but it allowed her to see gradual improvement. She began to feel a sense of control over the music that had once seemed impossible. During this time, she also learned to listen differently. She paid attention to the subtle differences in tone, the way one note could influence the next, the spaces between sounds that created rhythm and emotion. Music was no longer just pressing keys. It was shaping sound and expressing thought. This understanding made her practice sessions longer and more meaningful. Even if they remained challenging, life outside the piano remained unpredictable. Unexpected errands, family emergencies, and social obligations often interfered with her schedule. Some days, she practiced only for a few minutes, just enough to touch the keys and remind herself she had not abandoned her journey. Those short sessions, though seemingly minor, held significance. They were proof that she refused to let life stop her progress. Her physical endurance also became a factor. Hours of practice left her fingers sore, her wrists stiff, and her back aching. At times, her body seemed to protest her dedication. She learned the importance of pacing herself, taking small breaks, and maintaining health to continue pursuing her passion. Discipline now included caring for herself as well as for her music. At some point, she experienced a significant setback. She had been working on a complex piece for weeks, only to find she could not perform it correctly during a practice session. Every mistake seemed amplified, and frustration nearly overwhelmed her. She questioned whether she had the skill or patience to continue. The thought of starting over was heavy, almost unbearable. It would have been easy to let the setback define her, yet she chose to see it differently. She reminded herself that setbacks were part of the process, that every musician had faced moments of failure. She decided to break the piece into smaller segments and work on each until she mastered it. This approach required humility, patience, and acceptance of imperfection. Slowly, progress returned. The once intimidating piece began to feel more familiar, less threatening. The emotional journey during this period was intense. Music had become a reflection of her inner life. When she was happy, her playing carried lightness and rhythm. When she was frustrated, notes were sharp and abrupt. When she was contemplative, melodies flowed slowly and thoughtfully. The piano became a mirror, showing her moods and emotions more clearly than words ever could. Practicing was not just about learning music. It was about understanding herself. Friends and family began to notice subtle changes. Her confidence grew, and her posture while sitting at the piano improved. Her quiet determination became visible even in everyday tasks. Some who had doubted her abilities began to ask questions, curious about her dedication and progress. She answered simply, emphasizing persistence and love for the craft, rather than skill or achievement. Despite all challenges, she experienced moments of joy and triumph. A sequence she had struggled with for weeks finally felt smooth. A melody that had once sounded disjointed began to flow naturally. These moments were small but meaningful. They reminded her that effort, however slow and imperfect, yielded results. She also began to explore improvisation. Initially hesitant, she allowed herself to experiment, creating melodies from her own imagination. The piano responded to her curiosity, producing sounds that were uniquely hers. Mistakes were frequent, but they no longer discouraged her. They became part of the creative process, guiding her to discover new possibilities. Improvisation added a new layer of satisfaction and excitement to her practice. Throughout this period, the piano also taught her resilience. Life was unpredictable, and challenges outside practice tested her determination. Yet each session reinforced her ability to face obstacles calmly and persistently. Mistakes were no longer failures, but lessons. Frustration became a teacher, showing where effort needed to be directed. Patience was no longer optional, but essential. The relationship she developed with the piano was now deep and personal. It was a source of comfort in difficult times, a way to celebrate successes, and a mirror reflecting her journey. The instrument no longer intimidated her. It challenged her, guided her, and inspired her. Each note played was a dialogue, a conversation between her effort and the instrument's voice. By the end of this stage, she had transformed significantly. She had learned that true growth required struggle, that perseverance was essential, and that passion alone was not enough. The piano had shown her the value of discipline, patience, and self-reflection. She had also discovered that music could be a way to understand herself, express emotions, and find joy even in difficult circumstances. Though she was far from mastery, she understood the meaning of commitment and dedication. The path ahead remained long and challenging, but she faced it with renewed determination. She had proven to herself that struggle was not a reason to quit, but a path to learning and self-discovery. And with each note she played, she continued to write the story of her growth, one sound at a time. By this point, she had settled into a steady routine of practice. Life still brought its difficulties, but she approached each challenge with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a constant companion that demanded honesty, effort, and patience. Every session reminded her that growth was slow and required persistence. She started noticing small, meaningful improvements. Finger movement became more precise, and sequences that had once seemed impossible now flowed with increasing smoothness. Her timing improved, and she began to hear the emotional quality in each note rather than just the sound. She realized that learning piano was not about achieving perfection, but about understanding the relationship between effort and result, and between intention and expression. With this growing understanding, she began to structure her practice more intentionally. Instead of simply playing pieces she liked, she broke them down into sections, analyzing where she struggled and focusing on specific areas that needed attention. She practiced scales, exercises, and short passages repeatedly until they felt natural. It was tedious, and sometimes it felt like progress was invisible. But she understood that mastery could not be rushed. Her perception of the piano had changed completely. At first, it had seemed like a simple machine that responded to touch. Now she saw it as an extension of her mind and body, something that could convey subtle emotion and nuance when approached with care. Each session became a dialogue. She listened carefully, adjusted her touch, and learned from the feedback the instrument gave her. The piano taught her to be patient, reflective, and attentive to detail. Alongside technical improvement, she also started to connect more deeply with the emotional side of music. She realized that her own feelings could shape the way she played. Sadness could become gentle, slow, reflective melodies. Joy could become lively, fast, energetic sequences. She discovered a new level of expression that made practicing feel less like work and more like communication. The piano had become a voice she could use when words failed. Challenges continued to appear. Some days she found herself exhausted, her hands sore from long practice sessions, her mind heavy from outside responsibilities. Life sometimes forced her to skip practice, leaving her anxious and frustrated. But she had learned resilience. She returned to the piano whenever possible, knowing that consistency, no matter how imperfect, was key. Even small amounts of practice were better than none at all. During this time, she faced moments of self-doubt. Comparing herself to others sometimes made her question her abilities. Watching videos of skilled pianists made her feel small, as if she would never reach that level. But she learned to shift her focus. Instead of competing with others, she focused on her own progress. Every small victory, every correctly played passage, became a measure of success. She began to trust herself in her unique journey. Her relationship with those around her also evolved. Family and friends started to notice her dedication and improvement. Some began to ask questions, curious about how she managed to persist despite difficulties. She responded simply, describing her love for the piano and her belief in gradual progress. Approval was no longer her goal, but quiet understanding from others was welcome. She was no longer playing to impress anyone, for herself and for the music. One day, she tackled a particularly challenging piece that had intimidated her for months. She approached it differently this time, breaking it into smaller sections and focusing on one measure at a time. She practiced slowly, allowing herself to make mistakes and learn from them. Gradually, the sequence began to flow. The piece was not perfect, but it was playable. The satisfaction she felt was immense, tangible reward for months of persistence. This period also brought a deeper understanding of improvisation and creativity. She allowed herself to explore the piano without strict adherence to written music. She discovered that creating her own melodies was both challenging and liberating. Mistakes occurred frequently, but they were no longer discouraging. Each error provided insight into rhythm, timing, and emotional expression. She began to see the piano as a tool for storytelling, a way to communicate her experiences and feelings. Through all of this, the piano became a reflection of her life. Just as in her personal life, she faced challenges, setbacks, and moments of frustration. But perseverance, attention, and self-reflection led to progress. The instrument mirrored her journey, showing her that effort and patience were rewarded in time. She began to understand that growth was not only technical, but also emotional and personal. Physical endurance remained a factor. Long practice sessions left her fingers sore and her back aching, but she learned to pace herself. She discovered the importance of breaks, stretches, and proper posture. Taking care of her body allowed her to continue her pursuit without injury, and she came to see discipline as a combination of technical skill and physical care. By this stage, her playing had become more expressive and confident. Sequences that had once seemed impossible now felt familiar. And improvisation allowed her personality to emerge through the music. She no longer feared mistakes, but saw them as part of the process. The piano had become a teacher, a companion, and a mirror of her inner life. The challenges she faced outside the piano, such as financial stress, family obligations, and personal doubts, still existed, but they no longer dictated her relationship with music. She had developed resilience and a sense of control. The piano became a space where she could process emotions, release frustration, and celebrate small victories. It was a source of strength and joy, and she recognized its role in shaping her character. By the end of this stage, she had transformed into someone who could face difficulty with patience and determination. She understood the value of consistent effort, the importance of self-discipline, and the beauty of gradual growth. She had learned that mastery was not the goal. Engagement, learning, and expression were. Every note she played carried meaning, and every session left her stronger and more confident. Though there were still many challenges ahead, she was ready to face them. The piano had taught her more than music. It had taught her about perseverance, resilience, and the power of dedication. She was prepared to continue her journey, knowing that every struggle, every mistake, and every small success was part of a story she was writing for herself. The music was no longer just notes. It was her voice, her effort, and her life reflected in sound. By the time she reached this stage of her journey, the piano had become an inseparable part of her life. It was no longer just a hobby or a challenge. It was a way for her to express herself, a companion that listened without judgment. Every session was a conversation. Each note a word in a dialogue she shared with the instrument. She had learned patience, resilience, and discipline through countless hours of practice. But more than that, she had learned to listen not just to the piano, but to herself. She began to understand her own thoughts and emotions better, noticing patterns in how she approached challenges, how she celebrated small victories, and how she dealt with frustration. The piano was teaching her life lessons in the most subtle and profound ways. Friends and family had begun to notice a difference in her. Her confidence had grown, not in a loud or showy way, but in a quiet, undeniable presence. People who had doubted her abilities now looked at her with curiosity, some with respect, others with surprise. She no longer sought validation from them. She had found it within herself. The piano had given her something no one else could, a sense of accomplishment, an identity. She had also started performing for small groups, sharing her music with others not for applause but to communicate. Each performance was an opportunity to express the struggles and triumphs she had experienced. She played slowly at first, carefully choosing her pieces, making sure she could convey the emotion she wanted. The music spoke for her, telling stories of patience, persistence, and growth. The reactions were varied. Some listeners were moved by her playing, feeling the depth of emotion she poured into each note. Others were impressed by her skill, noticing the progress she had made from the tentative beginnings everyone had witnessed. And some still did not understand, expecting music to be effortless or flashy. But that no longer mattered to her. She had discovered that the value of music lay in honesty and expression. It's not in perfection or approval. Her daily practice continued, but it had evolved. She no longer approached it with only technical goals in mind. While she still worked on scales, timing, and sequences, she also focused on expression and improvisation. She experimented with melodies, created new sequences, and explored the emotional impact of different harmonies. The piano was no longer just a teacher. It had become a canvas for her creativity. Physical endurance was no longer a major concern. She had learned to manage long sessions, take breaks, and maintain proper posture. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence and fluidity, and her hands no longer hesitated over difficult passages. The instrument had become familiar, a trusted companion that responded to her touch and intention. She could feel the music within her hands before it even left the keys. Challenges still arose, both musically and personally. Life's demands never disappeared. There were days when she felt overwhelmed, when responsibilities outside practice pressed heavily. Yet she had learned that even small moments at the piano were valuable. She could play for 10 minutes or an hour, and each session mattered. The cumulative effect of these efforts had created a foundation of skill, confidence, and emotional expression. She also began mentoring others in small ways, sharing her experience with those who wanted to learn. She explained that progress was slow and required patience, but that dedication and love for the instrument were more important than innate talent. She encouraged them to focus on their own growth, to celebrate small victories, and to embrace mistakes as part of learning. Seeing others grow gave her a new sense of fulfillment. One day, she faced a particularly challenging piece, one that required both technical skill and emotional depth. She approached it with care, breaking it into sections, practicing slowly, and focusing on expression as much as accuracy. Hours passed, filled with repeated attempts, mistakes, and gradual improvement. Finally, she played the piece smoothly, each note carrying intention and feeling. The music resonated, and she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. It was not just a musical achievement. It was a reflection of her journey, of the effort and persistence that had brought her to this point. The piano had taught her lessons beyond music. She had learned that growth required patience, that struggle was not failure, that persistence was the key to overcoming challenges. She had discovered the importance of self-discipline, resilience, and self-awareness. And she had realized that the journey itself, with its difficulties and small victories, was more valuable than any final destination. Her confidence extended beyond the piano. In her daily life, she approached tasks with a newfound patience and focus. She no longer feared challenges or mistakes, understanding that each difficulty was an opportunity for growth. The lessons she had learned through music influenced her decisions, her relationships, and her approach to life's uncertainties. Despite all her progress, she remained humble. She understood that mastery was an ongoing journey, that there would always be new challenges, new pieces to learn, and new ways to express herself. She embraced this, knowing that the piano would continue to teach her, challenge her, and inspire her. By the end of this stage, she had transformed completely from the person who had first approached the piano with naive expectation. She had faced frustration, exhaustion, self-doubt, and criticism, yet she had persisted. She had learned to listen, to express, to create, and to grow. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a companion, a teacher. It's a reflection of her own resilience and dedication. The story of her journey was one of quiet triumph. She had proven, first to herself and then to others, that dedication, patience, and love for one's craft could overcome doubt and challenge. Her piano playing was imperfect, human, and real, but that was exactly what made it meaningful. Each note carried a piece of her effort, her emotions, and her growth. In the final moments of a long practice session, she paused, listening to the silence after the last note faded. She felt a sense of peace and satisfaction that came from knowing she had given her best, that she had faced challenges with courage, that she had embraced the journey fully. The piano had spoken, and through it, she had spoken too. She realized that the true reward was not in recognition or applause, but in the connection she had built with herself and with the music. As she closed the piano bench and walked away, she carried with her more than skill and knowledge. She carried resilience, confidence, patience, and a deeper understanding of life itself. The journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. Knowing that every challenge could be met with persistence and every note played had meaning beyond the sound itself,